So, Nat, let's talk about ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
It's sounding like a lot more females are getting diagnosed. For me, I worked in a clinic for probably 2 or so years, doing neurofeedback for people with autism, ADHD, and similar conditions. And so I know that it's a very complex condition. The presentation is different for females compared to males. And you couple that with long wait lists, expensive testing. It's quite a process. I'd love to know what your experience was, your whole journey.
It is such a process. It's been really interesting through building Neuro, talking to so many people with ADHD and really realizing like the diversity of experience, but like some really, really consistent anchor points throughout those experiences that like connect everybody and being like, why does it suck so much to get diagnosed or get treatment that you need? But my experience, I was one of the few females diagnosed really young. So mine is probably maybe more traditional when you think of ADHD, which was I was probably 6 years old, maybe 5 years old. And I was just in my own world. I was that kid that was like, they used to say like off with the fairies or head in the clouds, just always like imagining. And sometimes so much so that my teacher would call on me and I wouldn't hear her because I was so in my own thoughts. And they were testing everything. They were like, is she deaf? They tested my hearing. They tested my eyesight. They tested everything. And they were like, no, she's just not paying, like she's just in her own world. Like she's just not paying attention. And so it was through there that I tried like everything under the sun. So my parents really didn't want to put me on medication because I was complaining that it made me feel sick. I wasn't eating much. So I was like getting probably significantly underweight. And so I was just always saying like, I feel sick. And so they were looking at alternatives. And that left my like parents who we had just immigrated to Australia from South Africa. So, you know, they didn't have a lot of money. They were in this new country. They didn't know which doctors to go to, who to see, they didn't know what was left or right, up or down. But all they knew is like they really valued education. They really cared about me being able to like do well at school, in life, and have all the opportunities that they like wish they had had. So my mom ended up taking me to a doctor in like 2 hours away from home every Sunday. And he was doing like eye tracking. So like the randomest things, because I guess there wasn't that many science-backed alternatives. And so we were doing like anything under the sun. So I'd have to sit and track like a swinging ball for hours with my eyes. And like this did not work. And then like every day after school, Warren would make me like track but she didn't know because she's not a doctor. She doesn't have that medical education. She didn't know like this is rubbish. Yeah. She was just like anything to help my child because I can't give her medication. It doesn't respond well. And so I guess through my own journey, on and off medication through high school, on and off trying different treatments, I was really, really lucky that my mom spent the time to like sit with me and help me figure out where are the areas I'm struggling, how can I overcome this. But I'm also really lucky that my parents kind of had which I guess different things work for different people. But what worked for me in terms of attitude is my parents were never like, you have ADHD and that means this and that means that. They were kind of just like, just, you know, you're fine. Figure it out. You'll be all good. Like you're smart. You got this. There wasn't like a lot of like, which I know doesn't work for everyone. I know a lot of people like need concessions and need a different approach, but like I was a bit of I think a tough cookie approach worked for me. Being like, figure it out. You got this. You're good. Nothing's wrong with you. Just study hard. Just figure it out. Because all those other things didn't work. And then years later, as we're growing our team at Neuro, I'm meeting a lot of other of our team who have ADHD. And one of them had also gone to that weird eye doctor in Sydney. And she was like, I don't know what our parents were thinking, but this doctor was insane. Yeah. So it's like there's a lot of shared experience there around trying everything. But ultimately, I think there's been a lot of benefits to the way that I think when harnessing my ADHD positively and learning how to manage a lot of the more challenging aspects of ADHD, I think it can be an asset. And so, yeah, I mean, as much as everyone's journey is so unique, there's also so many similarities around the struggles and like the little quirks and the weird doctors you have to go see. So
yeah, it's interesting because, like, as you say, there's so many different nuances, like in terms of the diagnosis, in terms of the treatment. I think I almost did my PhD in ADHD. That rhymes. But yeah, I ended up doing it in epilepsy. But in studying ADHD, working in that clinic, when you read the literature and it's like you read about placebo effects of medication, and you read about the different treatments. I think I saw in the last couple years, games are now being used. I'm sure, I don't know if did you have anything like that? Did you try anything like that?
I didn't try games, but I remember like trying a bunch of like other things. So I know that the games are, there's a couple of companies doing different digital therapeutic games for ADHD at the moment. So that's interesting. But no, I remember getting moved out of regular class, like regular school, and into like special education.
No.
Where I remember it was such a vivid memory. I was probably like 5-6 years old, and I'm sitting in the auditorium hall outside of everyone else doing class, spelling my name in plasticine, and I'm thinking, what? How did I end up here? What is going on? And I remember like in the moment that I was spelling the letter N in plasticine, thinking, something's gone wrong. I don't know what's going on. Like, this is something, we've gone too far. And what's really funny is I went from there, then being put in, they were like, no, actually, she doesn't need special ed classes. She needs to be, she's bored. We need to like stimulate her more and put her in advanced classes. So then what I think they called it opportunity class, which is a weird thing to call like accelerated school. Yeah. But then I went to like accelerated classes for maths and other things, and that like challenged me more, but ultimately chose to go back to just regular school, regular classes.
With regular kids.
With regular kids, exactly. I was a regular kid. Like, I think, it was a weird journey. But no games. But I feel like I remember sitting at doctor's offices playing like a traditional, you'll be really familiar with like a go, no go or a TOVA.
Yeah.
Where it's just like press X, then don't press X, or don't press every time you see X, or press every time you see X. Like, you just do it for hours.
You probably were very high functioning, or at least, in that category.
I think I probably am now.
Yeah.
I don't know that I don't think I had as a child like mild ADHD. I probably had ADHD. I mean, if they're thinking I'm deaf or blind, I think my ADHD, and they discovered it. So often, as you mentioned this before, they don't identify women as having ADHD, especially early in life. Yeah. But I think if they identified me from 6 years old as a woman, and I wasn't disruptive, I was just in my own world, I was quiet, I think I probably had relatively severe ADHD. But I think I like learned through a lot of hard work and self-awareness and like self-analysis. I'm like quite an analytical person. How to harness myself and my focus, and how to take advantage of hyperfocus and other things like that to become, as a teenager or maybe a young adult, how to then be pretty effective and high functioning with ADHD. So yeah.
There's things where everyone just almost works it out for themselves in a way.
Yeah. I think as they've had to. But something like an analogy I often share to people about what it's like having ADHD is you're climbing the same mountain as everyone else, and you're expected, and you're trying to keep the same pace. You want to reach the peak of the milestone of them. You want to reach the I'm going to start that one again. So an analogy I often use to explain what it's like having ADHD to people is we're all climbing this mountain, and you want to reach the peak with everyone else because you want to celebrate getting to that peak, different life milestones, whatever it is, work. But it's really difficult to keep that pace because you've got a 10-kilo backpack on, and everyone else is just like chilling, walking up the mountain. And that's not to say that people who don't have ADHD don't have struggles. Life is varying degrees of challenging for everyone. But when you do have ADHD, you have this extra weight. And one of the things that helps, whether it's through medication, through alternative treatments, through just finding your own ways to cope is how to either get really strong quads, get like high endurance, work really hard, whatever it is. But it doesn't need to be that, it shouldn't have to be that much harder. And so I think what people really resonate with is how do we lighten the load of the backpack? Because you can always get strong quads and whatever, but you're still carrying a heavier backpack, and that's exhausting. So you're still, while it might look like you're at the same place on the mountain as everyone else, you're exhausted. And so I think while everyone does have their own coping mechanisms, it takes a lot of energy to upkeep them. And so I think that's why it's so important to come up with, to have treatment. So it's not just for the people who are super, super, who have, more impaired by their ADHD, but more about saying, all right, well, let's lighten your load a little bit so that you can take on more hobbies, enjoy life more, enjoy different, like more moments with friends, family, whatever it is that you want to be doing with your time, instead of spending so much time just doing like work.
The bare minimum.
Exactly. Exactly right.
I love that saying, lighten your load, because you're lightening the load for people with light.
I like that.
Yeah, exactly. The minute you said that, I was like, yes, using light to lighten the load.
I like that a lot. Yeah, so I mean, there's so many different ways to image the brain, but one of them is using light, so optically, and that is one of the core technologies we use to image the brain. So essentially, we make a headband that treats and tracks symptoms of ADHD, and that tracking part is unlocked by optical brain imaging, where we can record your brain using light. And there's a bunch of reasons why that's really good. But traditionally, brain imaging has been either super expensive, a combination of super expensive, really difficult to use in the real world outside of hospitals and research clinics and centers. And one of the benefits of optical imaging, specifically the innovations we've made with our device, is that we could get it really portable, really cost effective. And so people can actually feasibly use it for conditions like mental health, specifically ADHD. Or I'm excited to see how the field progresses and how that makes its way outwards. But essentially, one of our core monitoring innovations was the miniaturization of this big sort of fridge-sized brain imaging device that was $500,000 or $250,000 US, and get it down into a portable, affordable headband that's like 100x lower cost than anything else that's been available to date. So yeah, really excited about that.
Yeah.
And what that can unlock for people with ADHD.
So the large device that's $500,000, this is, I'm guessing this is a NIRS machine? Okay. So for those who don't know, NIRS, or N for Nelly, NIRS stands for near-infrared spectroscopy. And so you might be familiar with infrared light from the sun, or infrared saunas is the latest craze, I think. So I'm an EEG gal, and EEG and diffusion MRI. So I'm not too familiar with NIRS, but my understanding of it is that you're basically harnessing the use of infrared light and its interaction with tissues within the body and brain. Is this to look at the level of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood within that tissue that you're observing?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So from an MRI, it's pretty different to EEG, but it's much more similar to MRI in terms of the way we think about it. So we're also measuring changes in blood oxygenation levels. So the same sort of physiological measurement, but instead of doing that with magnetic resonance, we're doing that by shining light. Actually, a really great analogy is your Apple Watch, the same way it measures your heart rate, right? How there's those little lights at the back of your Apple Watch, and that's measuring your heart rate and blood oxygenation. It's like that, but just stronger. So it goes into your brain and it passes through your skull into your brain and lets us see how oxygenated and deoxygenated blood move around your brain. And the reason that's important is because that tells us where brain activity is happening.
Yeah, I think, so NIRS, to me, NIRS is the technique, and then functional NIRS, or FNIRS, is the application of the technique. Would you say is that what you use in your device?
Yeah. functional NIRS.
So that is that like fMRI then, I guess? Like
Yeah,
functional MRI.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly right. There's like a lot of analogs between FNIRS and MRI or
Okay.
fMRI.
Yeah, and that is like that's quite incredible because, well, the fMRI machines and I guess the NIRS machines as well are, as you said, these giant machines. You've whittled it down into this wearable that is also wireless. Why do you think no one's done that before?
I think about this all the time.
Yeah,
The thing
like
is, people
it's
have,
weird.
yeah, it's crazy. People, and we're not the only company building a FNIRS device. I think what makes us unique in the way that we're thinking about FNIRS or brain imaging wearables for neurotech, it kind of zooms out not just in FNIRS, but the way we think about wearables and neurotechnology is when it comes to looking at the research devices, they're really great, big and expensive. Where a lot of the field is going is how do we increase the data quality? Meaning, how do we have more channels, more data, more detailed data? And that's fantastic, especially if you want to do more research. But from my research background, and we can go into like how I started Neurate and like my background later, but from my research background, I actually got to use a lot of the research grade NIRS. And I thought the data was good enough to build the models. We were doing predictive models of cochlear implant success. So how do we know before we implant you whether or not you're a good candidate, and your brain will learn to interpret the electrical signals from your cochlear implant as meaningful sound. Not everyone does that. It's a neuroplasticity thing.
Cochlear implant.
Correct.
As in the cochlear implant.
Well, implants generally.
Yes.
So yeah, and the data was good. We were able to identify certain predictors of response using our NIRS. So when I say our NIRS, the lab's NIRS, not the neuro NIRS. And so I didn't think we needed more quality data for those kinds of models. We needed something that people would actually use, because when you're getting a cochlear implant, you're either very young, baby, or you're pretty old and you lost your hearing. People did not want to stick this big, spiky, heavy device on their babies, and they didn't want to come in for a 3-hour session at a lab in the middle of the city that they had to spend their whole day around to do that.
So hard to get participants right.
Yeah, exactly. And so I thought, to me, the problem wasn't how good the data was. The problem was how accessible it was to people. And so instead of thinking about how we can get more data, better data, more channels, bigger, and make it essentially more like MRI, I was thinking, how do we make it smaller, more affordable, more accessible, easy to use, user-friendly? And so that's what kind of prompted a thinking that is kind of divergent from the general way people in the field are thinking about this. And so I think that's why our device looks different and performs differently generally, because of that high level different thinking about the field. But there are a number of companies making more portable, so probably not as small and light and like we think about like density of channel per size.
Yeah.
So probably nobody has as small of a device with as many channels as we do.
The spatial resolution.
And at such a low cost. But there are other devices, but I would say the lowest cost device that is also portable is probably $50,000 USD.
Wow.
And so from that point, we're still, at least like we're significantly cheaper, like order of magnitude cheaper. Yeah, I think that's come down to innovation that we've made on an engineering front.
I'm just curious because I guess EEG is sort of the gold standard in epilepsy, and I don't know. I don't think there is a gold standard way of looking at a brain of a person who has ADHD. But what made you look into NIRS? Was it because you were working with it, like as opposed to EEG? Because there are so many BCI devices using EEG. It's crazy. I've got like a giant list of them. Yeah, what made you choose NIRS?
I think it was a combination. So through my studies in neuroscience, we got to use EEG, not MRI, but we got to use EEG. And then for my postgrad, we were doing, I was at a lab doing implantable devices. some more brain-machine interface, tiny little
Yeah.
devices, which were not EEG, but they had similar like idea of measuring changes in electromagnetic fields. And so I had just had so much experience with how noisy those had been.
Yeah.
And when I was thinking, and then when I was using the FNIRs in lab, it was so much more usable. And you're thinking like babies and elderly people, like they're shaking, they're moving, and you want to be in real world environments, which is going to be really challenging with something like EEG.
Absolutely.
I mean, EEG is challenging in a lab, and you can get great data. It's amazing. But it's challenging in and of itself in a lab. So imagine taking that into the real world. And so, yeah, I mean, when I was working at that bionics company, there was a number of different segments. So there were people doing EEG actually for epilepsy.
Okay.
They were, people using EEG for a bunch of different things, MRI, NIRS, that we span the gambit of different ways to interface with the brain and body.
Yeah.
So I had a good sort of selection to get my hands on and see what would make most sense. But NIRS really jumped out to me as the technology that would enable real world brain imaging at a cost and accessibility and data quality that would make sense. And so I always ask myself, like, why is there not more research with NIRS?
Yeah.
And I think it's just new, and the pace of science and research in academia is often lagging. So
Yeah, because I've seen quite a few papers now that have come out that use NIRS to assess the effect of medication in people with ADHD. You're going to use your device for something different, is that right?
yeah, I mean, we can use this device to assess medication or alternative treatments. So in the same way, it's just imaging the brain. But what we do is we've integrated it with a type of non-invasive brain stimulation as an alternative to medication-based treatments, which we're running a clinical trial on at the moment to look at the efficacy of that, though there's quite a few published papers. I guess the point is to bring personalization and precision to mental health. That's really what we're doing as a core, as a mission. So whether that's through non-invasive brain stimulation, alternative science-based treatments, being able to personalize those, or whether it's bringing personalization and precision to drug-based treatments, like there's so much to do in the mental health space to kind of bring it up to speed. But we're very focused on the combination of NIRS and non-invasive brain stimulation for the treatment of ADHD, treatment and monitoring. And I think monitoring is really the piece, like it's our core innovation, but it's also, I think, the piece that unlocks so much for the way that we treat.
Because monitoring really is the bit or the part that allows you to pick up those nuances and those subtle differences between individuals. That is really going to, I guess, enhance whatever people are already doing, I guess, in the ADHD space. Are you going to use your device to observe, monitor, treat, just everything that you can do to personalize and enhance what people are already doing?
Absolutely. I think you can see this across the wearable space more generally. So of course, if you're given the opportunity to measure something, you can't improve what you can't measure.
Yeah.
And so adding that measurement piece allows people to understand what's going on and how can I improve. And we see that across the board. So like companies that I really admire, like Oura Ring, they're allowing you to measure your sleep so you can improve it. That might be for a person who doesn't have sleep apnea or insomnia, or a person who does, in which case you can then really get interesting with what you're doing. People talk a lot about precision and personalization. I think those are important, but there's also a third piece, which is how do you stick to things, right? Like behavior change, essentially, because a big part of implementing treatments is also sticking to them.
Yeah.
And understanding what's working, what's not working, what you should do about it. So yeah, I think that's a big piece. Like it's just a third point on behavior change. It's like we all know how to be generally healthy. Like, oh, I want to lose weight. I need to exercise and eat healthily. We all could have abs, but nobody does. And it's not because we don't know. It's because of the behavior change aspect. So I think that's a big part of unlocking outcomes for people, is helping them adhere.
Why stimulation is useful as a treatment for ADHD?
Stimulation is an interesting treatment across the board. So there's a lot of research looking at it, at depression, ADHD, pain. There's a company looking at it for menstrual pain. It's really, really interesting the way that stimulation can influence our brains. For ADHD, we're looking at balancing brain activity. So instead of doing that with stimulant medication, you can do that with non-invasive brain stimulation. And there's a lot of research looking into it. And what's interesting is, like a lot of things with the brain, the mechanism isn't super well understood.
Yeah.
But excitingly, we actually are running one of the largest non-invasive brain stimulation for ADHD studies. And so we're really excited to see the outcomes of that.
I know you can't tell us a lot about the device itself.
Yeah.
Because you're doing super cool patent things. But what can you tell us about it? Like, just in terms of the design and so on.
Our goal with the device is to build something that is super easy to use. You don't notice that you're wearing it. It's comfortable. It fits everybody. And to really make it something people want to wear. And so we don't want people with ADHD to feel like they're different and they have to do something. I think people love good products regardless of whether or not, like, I see so many medical products that are
hideous.
Just like, you're just like, oh, when you see it, feel a little bit sad when you see them. And
like,
we don't
could have been
that.
better.
Yeah, we want to inspire joy.
Yeah.
So we really try and think a lot about the user, and we actually have a next version of the device that we're working on that's going to look even cooler than this. But yeah, things that are important to us are flexibility, fitting everyone's head size and head shape.
And that's hard.
It's not easy.
Did that take you a while?
It has taken us a while. It's not easy. I know so much about the contour shapes of people's heads and the different like ways that head shape varies.
Yeah.
More than you'd ever care to know about heads. So we've been working on that. And essentially the goal would be that you have to wear this for, a short period of the day. Every day at first, and then eventually less often than that. To treat and track symptoms of ADHD. That's the goal we're working towards.
Yeah, that seems easy enough, because it'd be really similar to like if you got up and took your medication or got home from school and had a little session. I guess
did a short meditation or went for a walk.
And I mean, people should be doing meditation, right?
Totally.
Yeah, I agree.
Totally.
That is so cool. Can I try it on?
Absolutely. Go for it.
Okay, I'm gonna try and do this very discreetly.
Gracefully. There you go.
Okay, so this is like an elasticized piece of material at the back here. Okay, just looking at myself in the mirror.
So the new design, like I've been getting into straps and doing all that fun stuff. The new design is really nice.
It's quite light.
Yeah.
It's actually surprisingly light.
It weighs less than an iPhone, for example.
Okay. Yeah, okay. It doesn't feel like it's pressing on my head in any place, which I like a lot. And I do feel like I'm just getting into like engineer mode here. Yeah, I feel like it's got good
Give us your review.
Contact. With the EEG ones, sometimes you can put them on and you can feel that it's loose in certain places. You can feel that you don't have that good contact, and you just know that the data that you're capturing might be a little subpar.
Yeah, I've tried some of the EEG devices. Have you tried any of them?
Yeah, I actually just made a video of the standard like stretchy cap that we use in research. But then I've seen a lot of the ones that they use for epilepsy, which I guess are not caps. They're just electrodes. And those ones, because they're not caps, I guess they fall off a lot. Yeah, I like that a lot. It's very light. I would use it. Yeah.
Thanks.
I would use it even if I didn't have ADHD. What are some of the challenges that you've faced with creating this device?
There's challenges on so many levels. All of them have been really interesting opportunity to learn. Challenges, so many. So, I mean, on a device level, it's been challenging to get that flexibility, that fit, the count of channels we want at an accessible price point. So we're constantly weighing up like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 different constraints and making sure we can kind of patch them all together and fit them all together in a way that still results in a product that has everything we want it to have. So that's always challenging. Making sure that through all of this engineering and development that we're doing on the product from a hardware and software perspective, that we don't lose sight of our end user.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're doing this all for. And so constantly thinking like, yes, a lot of our team have ADHD, so we're the like target users, which definitely helps, but making sure that we're constantly talking to users and constantly getting their feedback, because with medical devices, it's hard to actually give this to people outside of a clinical study. And so having all those touch points and making sure we really, really understand and integrate the user at the center of everything we do. When you can't give them the product, it's not like software where you can be like, I've got an MVP, I'm going to ship it.
Yeah.
See what everyone thinks.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to do that, but you've got to find your own ways to do that within, you know, the ethics of a medical device. And then other challenges have been around, like, you know, obviously fundraising is a challenging thing, especially right now. I mean, apparently things are getting better. We were really lucky. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I'm just listening to like what everyone's saying on like Twitter, now X, or like LinkedIn, and speaking to founders. But I think I don't know. Probably I'm an eternally positive person.
And you have to be as a founder,
optimistic,
right? Like, I mean, you have to be. I find this space, like as a founder, quite challenging. I speak to a lot of other female founders who are working in the hardware space, working in sort of a newer-ish area where that use case or that first customer isn't really well defined or well known yet. And I know so many female founders say they really struggle to raise.
We've been okay, luckily. I think we do have a really clear idea of what our first use case and first customer is. I think that's really helpful when you're already building in a space with so many unknowns. Having that North Star of like, who are we building for and what are we building and why is going to be so helpful. Look, fundraising is not easy. It is, I have to say, like one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Yeah. Is this the first thing you've ever fundraised for?
Yes.
So this is your
actually,
first
technically, no.
Okay.
Like a while ago when I was in uni, I went to a hackathon with some friends and we ended up winning the hackathon. And as the prize, we got into the top 10 of an accelerator here in Sydney, or a program. I don't know what it was really called. An incubator, I think they called themselves, where the prize was $50,000 or $100,000, and we got straight into the top 10. We had to decide what to do, but they wanted me to be full-time and I wasn't going to drop out of uni at that time, and so they went on with it, and I think they raised money and went on. So that was like just a little taste, just from like, this was just like a bunch of girls going to a pretty much, I think it was a female-only hackathon, which was really cool.
Nice.
So I just like convinced them to come, and then we started building, and it was really a great time. But I left it there. So this is, I would consider this my first startup.
Raise. Yeah. Do you go on your own?
I do.
Or do you go with like your team? Or
no, I go on my own. I often have my co-founder with me, like especially for the later stage, like the later stages. So I'll have him come in, because it's so important that any investor is really like loves our team and really like knows us, and we all get along really well and share a vision for what we're building. But in the beginning, it's all me.
A lot of people say that it helps to have a male co-founder. Do you think that that's the case?
I don't know in any other way. Okay. However, the statistics would agree. I think I've seen some stats where it's like all female teams are the worst off in terms of stats on who gets funded or how venture dollars are deployed. But I will say fundraising is incredibly difficult, incredibly rewarding, challenging. All of your every like ounce of resilience you have has to be there to support you. So yeah, it's in hindsight exhilarating and fun, a thing that really like pressure tests you and your company and your ideas. But in the moment, it is incredibly difficult.
And I guess you have to sort of see it as like a fun challenge. Otherwise, you would just get bogged down with all the noise and the nose and all that. What made you decide to take the leap? Because you were working full time. Well, actually, tell us more about this.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit about the kind of person I am. I think weirdly, like I'll just go all the way back from the beginning because I feel like it's a story that needs to start at the beginning.
Tell us.
But you know, when you meet those relatives that you haven't seen in like 15 years and they're like, I haven't seen you since you were a little kid, you were this big, and they pinch your cheeks and like tell you stories. That I had this weird moment a couple of years ago where I saw like an aunt that I hadn't seen in forever. And she was like, you know what? You always were the strangest little kid. You used to ask older adults what they were thinking and how they felt about things. You would just go and say, what are you really thinking? Or like, how do you really feel about this?
We've all got this.
Which is like, it's a strange thing for a kid to ask adults, I think. Apparently I was doing it at like 4 years old. And so I've always been really inquisitive about like people's internal worlds and what we're thinking and feeling and why we do and how that differs between people. I guess being that like inquisitive kind of person and always wondering about the brain was really lucky for my then later diagnosis of having ADHD and finding my own ways to deal with that and to, you know, succeed academically or just like kind of manage those symptoms. But as that kind of led to, as a teenager, me thinking, okay, well, I'm a pretty happy person. I'm pretty, and you know, an early adult, I'm a pretty happy person. I am like, because I know so many people struggle with so many like mood related things. And I thought I'm really lucky. I was like, you know, tumultuous teenager like everybody, but got to a point where I was like really contented, really happy, really wanting to understand how could I help other people be happy? Why did I get so lucky that I get to be this like kind of contented person who has pretty good well-being? And what about the steps that I took to get there can I share with others? And I thought, okay, well, what, like as a 20-year-old or 18-year-old, what tools do I have available? I'm like, well, I could tell everyone, but that seems like really ugh. So what if I like try to create experiences with people through art and try and help them come to a realization that they can, through self-work, self-exploration, introspection, like discipline, all these different like tools we have available, how can I help them realize that they can overcome like pretty much anything? And I realized that requires discipline, and that requires self-awareness. That requires so many things that are so difficult. Really made me understand why people go for like easier options. Like, oh, if there was a pill I could use to lose weight, if there's a pill I could use to be happy, if there was a pill I could use for all these different things. And so then I realized, oh, it's about motivation. That comes from your brain. And so then I went to go study neuroscience because I realized that all of these things, what differentiates people who can that have ADHD that can exercise the motivation to do things versus can't, that, you know, all of those different experiences. If you get to experience a really like sort of happy, if you get to experience a lot of happiness and joy, or if you don't, so much of that is in your brain. So much of it is also environmental, but you know, so much of it is in your brain. So I went to go study neuroscience, which then through the study of neuroscience, I realized, well, yes, so much is happening in your brain, but our tools that we use to image the brain are limited, and our ability to understand the brain is actually limited by our ability to look at it, and that's limited by the tools. So we need to have better tools. So that's how I got that. I found that lab doing the implantable brain machine interfaces, because they had developed a novel way to image the brain in really, really tiny devices. So I actually did that in biomedical engineering across with neuroscience. So I got them to finally collaborate. Which was like not that common where I went to university to get those groups to collaborate. It was there that I realized so many of the problems I care about are around mental health, or while, you know, paralysis or inability to speak are such huge issues and so important for me in my lived experience. I really cared about that day to day, like how am I feeling? What am I thinking? How am I dealing with, you know, my mental well-being? Am I able to achieve the things I want in life as a person with ADHD? But just as a human, I think it's like a pretty human experience. from there, I thought, okay, well, are there science-based ways that we can help people influence their brain? First of all, understand your brain, because that will help you change your behavior. And I think it comes back to that Aura Ring or the Whoop or smartwatch or brain imaging device that we're making. If I look at exactly, if I look at my brain, will it help me understand my brain in order to make better choices? And then if you're a person who has a problem with attention or focus, maybe you have ADHD. If you're a person who has an issue with mood, maybe you have depression, what are the tools you have available? You have medication, which for a lot of people has a lot of side effects. So are there, science-based ways to avoid that, so you can not have to choose between symptoms and side effects, but to actually have something that's going to be a sort of lasting thing that you can carry through your life and not feel like you're being you're having to make sacrifices. That's where I was at when I got that job at the bionics company. This bionics company was a really interesting place. I don't know, it was weird. So I moved to Melbourne from Sydney for that job during COVID.
And this was after undergrad, so you'd
straight after honors.
Uni.
Straight after honors. A month out, or 2 months out, and they were like, come to Melbourne. And I went because they were doing really interesting research. But what was really cool was they weren't like a company doing one thing. They sat somewhere between academia and industry. And within that company, they actually spun out startups. I didn't know this. I didn't recognize that was what was happening at the time, because I'd never heard, I wasn't thinking that way. But a pretty well-known epilepsy company in Sydney started out of there. There was 5 or 6 different what would become startup companies, but were really just research, translational research in neuroscience. And that was a really great place for me to see the sort of gambit of what was available and to start thinking really critically about cool, this technology is really impactful from a research perspective, but what does that mean to take that and make it impactful at a population level?
Exactly.
And so I got to start thinking that way. And so from that thinking, I guess I've always been pretty mission driven, even in all the decisions I've made, deciding what to study wasn't what can I get a job doing? I never thought, what can I get a job doing? I thought what am I interested in? I've always been driven by what interest and helping people. And so that's made all of the decisions kind of for me as a guiding principle. So when I had the idea for Neurot, I wasn't even really thinking about what's the risk. It wasn't a hard decision at all. I just had the idea, called my co-founder, who is an electrical engineer and physicist. We were actually doing our honors together in that same implantable brain machine interface lab.
Okay.
And he's just the smartest engineer and physicist I know. He could do anything. And we used to build things together all the time. We built an EEG, we built a bunch of different things. And I was like, why are they so big and expensive? Can we make these portable and affordable? Is it a physics problem? What is it? And he looked into the research and he was like, I think we could try. Do you want to try? And I was like, yeah. And then we started tinkering a little bit. And then we were like, this is actually really cool. I'm going to quit my job. Let's just build this. I just want to build this. I think, how was it old at the time? I was 25. I was whatever. Life's short. This is cool. This could help people. This is interesting. Let's do that. So it didn't even start as we're going to start a company. It was just this is amazing tech. We can see the impact this would have in so many areas. We didn't even stop being it's ADHD. We started being this is impactful technology that can help a lot of people, help the world understand our brains. And we were really motivated by what does the world look like when humans understand their brains? It's the thing that motivates everything we do.
It absolutely
every decision, every feeling, every connection, everything. And we don't understand it. So we're operating from this almost reactive position in life. And it's just we're just imagining what the world looks like when humans understand their brain and use that understanding to their benefit. And so that's what it started as. And then through that, we were okay, well, a great place to start would be ADHD, because that's a problem that I experience, but also so many people do. And it's also one where we can have impact immediately. And so, it didn't feel like a hard leap. Sorry to circle back to your question. It didn't feel like a hard leap. It just felt like I don't know, go for it.
Something you had to do.
Yeah.
Our brain health or brain well-being is in charge of everything. So, you see these apps for meditation or for anxiety, depression, all these things, they all fall under this umbrella of brain well-being, sticking to habits, sticking to a diet, you know, being resilient, all these things. And then everyone tries to tackle it from these little sort of areas, but it's so much more complex than that. And, you know, you get like, I don't know, what is it, 30,000 neuroscientists at Society for Neuroscience, the conference. Yet we still know so little about the brain, right?
Blows my mind. We have rockets going to Mars and we don't understand how these like monkey brains work.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy.
Like how people that are flying the rockets, how their brains work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's wild.
Yeah.
But sometimes I just like to like thought experiment, wonder, like imagine what it would be like, how humans would live and how it would impact the way we live if we did understand our brains like in a real way. And I think devices like these are really impactful because they're the first step. So I think a lot of things start where there's a deficit or an issue, where the signal to noise is high. So where you have a deficit in focus or you have a deficit in, you know, for ADHD. In a medical sense, you can really help people and there's a way to do that now. But if you like zoom out like 20 years, what was like, you could kind of potentially even map a way that we came from having medical technologies that understood the brain in a sort of system where the brain was notably different. And then we started to understand the brain where that was less noticeably different and less until we actually start to have a picture of what the brain, how we understand the brain and how that technology transitions out of being something that's for a medical population, but then transitions into being something that everybody can use. And having, you know, data at that level would definitely be a huge step towards understanding our brains. So.
You have these definitions in research of normal, normal populations, disease populations, and sure, there are like chronic disease populations, people who have MS or epilepsy and things like that. But when you get to that neurodivergent type of brain, you almost want to say like, what's normal, you know?
Absolutely.
I've spoken a lot about this with my colleagues, and one of the things that we don't have in a normal population is long-term data. So for people with epilepsy, they might wear an implanted device for a year, but they have epilepsy. But has any normal person, normal person as defined by the literature, do we have a year of data from that sort of person? Do we have 5 years? We don't. We just don't have any long-term data.
Do we even have like a month?
Yeah.
Like, we're like a year. Yeah. I'm like, I would love that. But do we even have a month? We generally don't. And that's where I would go back to like what tools would allow us to do that.
Yeah.
The brain, like that limitation, our ability to understand our brain is limited by the tools with which we have to study it. And so that's why we thought it was so important. I know people want to avoid hardware at all costs generally when it comes to startups, but we just thought it was so important to be building the tools that we would hopefully be using in the next generation of brain imaging, medicine around the brain, like be able to get that data of what your brain looks like in a day, a week, month, a year, lifetime.
Exactly.
Really
I would
incredible.
use it.
Well, we've got to come up with really good use cases so that when people use it, they're getting the benefit. And so I think that's where healthcare becomes the focus, right? Like there's a direct benefit for someone with epilepsy. There's a direct benefit for someone with ADHD or another mental health condition. And when we continue with Neurode and are able to advance this technology even more to the point that it's less of a headset and more of like a thing you barely even notice and feel. I feel like that's when it can start being like the Oura Ring for your brain or something like that, where you don't have to have anything different about you.
I feel like you chose that design because that's obviously where there's no hair, as opposed to, I guess, a headband that you would wear.
Yeah,
a headband, you could walk around with.
A headband would be so great for design purposes. I would love that. But you're right. The forehead has no hair, which is very important for NERS and also for a lot of the mental health conditions we're interested in, like ADHD. There's a huge frontal lobe component. Okay. And so that's a really great match in terms of the technology matching the use case.
What's the future for Neurode?
Yeah, I mean, let's get this thing in people's hands. So obviously as a medical device company, we're looking to go through the FDA. So we've got clinical trials. And then once we get that FDA clearance, we'll be offering it to people through, it'll be a prescription device, but
okay, so you would have to see a clinician first
to get a prescription. That's what I imagine being the case initially. But there's hopefully a path for it being over the counter. I know that in Europe, devices like these can be over the counter.
Really?
In the US currently, that isn't the case. So yeah, really the goal would be, I mean, talk about like the actual steps to get there is one thing, but the vision for Neurode would be to be making neurotechnology, making treatments for different mental health conditions accessible and affordable, so patients have the option to choose a treatment that works for them. So our first use case is ADHD, but we can see this technology working, and there's already interesting literature in a bunch of different conditions. And so it's about enabling patients to get the treatment that they need, and bringing precision, personalization, and behavior change to all aspects of mental health. Because, I mean, you would be pretty shocked if you went to a cardiologist or pretty much any doctor and they didn't measure something about you and they're just like, and so, or, open
like
a big DSM test book. So
the DSM, don't get me started on that.
Yeah. So I think we're really moving in that direction, and I would love to see Neurode facilitate precision, personalized mental health care.
You can go into Harvey Norman and get all these different wearables.
Oh, like your Oura Ring.
You can't get like a brain one.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, to the goal of helping humans understand how their brain works and using that to improve their well-being, because we're existing in a place of, mental health. And then I think once we get to transcend that into well-being, I think that's really an interesting space. So right now, prescription device, medical device for the treatment. I mean, we're not yet. That's what we're working towards. We're working towards being a device to treat and monitor ADHD and other mental health conditions as we grow and expand. But ultimately, anyone should be able to image their brain. Totally. They may not want to use non-invasive brain stimulation. They may, in terms of enhancement, but Apple Watch for your brain, Oura Ring for your brain, insert wearable that's doing imaging for your brain with Neurode. And I think there's a lot of things we can be tracking, whether it's for behavior change, whether it's for brain health. There's like so much going on in longevity. We're living longer and longer.
Totally.
And our brain health is so important for the quality of life that we have in our later years, being able to look at that. So I see it less as a pharma thing and more as a thing for people. Absolutely, that's an opportunity for pharmaceutical companies to understand the effects of their drugs on the brain, not like, on an ongoing basis, day 1 to day 30 or whatever they do in their trials. But really, we're building for people.
As a growing startup, it's probably something that is really important to keep in mind, that end user at the end of the day is the person paying for it, I guess.
Hopefully, we'll be able to get reimbursement coverage, and so they won't have to pay too much
like
for
a
it.
Medicare benefit when they actually decide to fix Medicare. Why did you decide to build in Sydney?
Well, we're from here. We love Sydney.
Yeah.
I mean, love Australia. Australia is an incredible place to live.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Obviously, family is here. Our team, there's so much talent in Australia. So much incredible talent. I do. So so many smart people. And so much talent, and the best. I think we have a bit of a brain drain. I think the best about when I went to San Francisco and I spent quite a bit of time there. There's so many Aussies there. Okay. I bump into Aussies all the time.
Yeah,
and so I think a lot of them are going over there, and I understand that.
It's a shame.
It's a shame. But at the same time, I understand it. And as a Aussie company who's looking to build for the US, we're most likely going to have to, at some point, move to the US because we're dealing with the FDA. Our users are going to be there. We're going to need to be there. But there's incredible talent in Sydney, in Australia. And it's a wonderful place to live. And it's also more affordable. We have things like R&D tax incentive. People don't think about that, but that's 43 cents back for every dollar you spend on R&D. So if you raise, let's say, $1 million, you get almost $500,000 additional runway. Who would ever give up on that? As a hardware company or a company who does hardware, yes. Medical device, yes.
Yeah, who wouldn't want
Who
that?
wouldn't want that?
A lot of people mention that actually as one of the key reasons that they're building here in Australia. And I think we really need to foster that environment here and make that whole ecosystem just way more simple and easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think some of the things I've noticed spending a lot of time in the US versus here, is that universities in the US are so much easier to collaborate with and so much faster. I found so much faster to like get there. They're like, yes, when can I start? Yesterday, let's go. Let's just do it.
Yeah.
Whereas here I found it quite slow moving to collaborate with academia.
You need to collaborate with, do you feel that you need to?
There's options. So there's obviously like CROs, academia. There are different ways to do research. I would love to collaborate with academia. Obviously, there are trade-offs to each thing. So like CRO is pretty expensive, but they're like, it's their business. They do it to timeline. Whereas researchers are a lot slower, but they're experts in their field. Like it's ideally who you'd want to be running your studies with. So yeah, I think collaborating with academia is really important.
Why do you think academia is so slow?
Good question. It's funny because post doing my honors, my supervisor, I was going to do a PhD and I got the scholarship to do my PhD.
God you didn't.
And he was like, I've spent enough time with you to like think of you like my daughter, and I know the things you want and how much energy you have and how much drive you have, and like you're always pushing things forward and forward and forward. You're gonna die here. Like your fire is just gonna be put out. Don't do a PhD. Go work somewhere. And so it was post that. So he was a slow old professor, and he was like, don't join me.
Okay.
He's like, we're just gonna So I think they even know how slow they are. I think
it's true. I have thought about that. And on top of that, they're all participating in like 100 different projects.
This is across academia. So I think it's that maybe the incentive structure isn't there because they really value publishing papers everyone has to teach. Like they're splitting everyone up in terms of their time and their day.
And if you have ADHD, that's like the worst thing ever.
Or even if you just need to like accomplish big, difficult things, you need focus. And they're doing the opposite of focus.
Full-on blocks of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incentive structures.
When they don't really need to.
If a PhD was like a single founder trying to start something, like you could get further in that time than what academia allows you to do. So it's also like gives you forever to do something. That's probably a very unpopular opinion. That's from someone who works way too much.
Like I
maybe
think
it's just like a healthy way to work. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, I think PhDs just, it depends on your supervisor, but yeah, there's so many weird things going on there. Unpopular opinion. I say that
maybe it's just healthy person. Maybe to work. Like maybe it's just another way of viewing life.
No, but PhDs work 24/7 as well.
Yeah, that's true.
You only go on social media to find a lot of PhD opinions and experiences. But you're right, the output is not the same. Like if you were a founder and you worked that many hours, the output and the outcome would be something different, I feel. That's my opinion anyway. Yeah.
It's like, let me know if you find the answer.
Okay, one last question. What advice would you give to someone starting out?
Just start. And I think when you're just starting, something doesn't happen unless you do it yourself, which is kind of always the case. But more so when it's just you in the beginning. So the advice I would have is just do it. Just just take one foot in front of the other. Just take the next step and just continually, obviously be strategic. Like you don't want to run in with your eyes closed. But I think it's more important that you take a step and do something and build something than get stuck in analysis paralysis and overthinking it or being so worried about is this a risk? Is that it is a risk? That's not gonna it's not gonna become less risky by thinking about it more.
Yeah.
I would just say do it. Yeah. And build something quickly.
Yeah.
We had built our first version of our device, which looked very different to this in the first 2 weeks of coming up with the idea.
Wow.
So,
really?
Yeah.
Did you sleep?
Like,
Did you eat or sleep?
We did. Not like a huge amount, but we did. We were having so much fun.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like
You're obsessed with
we
it.
were having so much fun. Like I always think back to like, I mean, we're only been around for 3 years, so it's not like back, but I always think back to when we first started, we were having the best fun. Just like constantly like thinking, building, eating, sleeping this idea, this product. And like, if I think back to the first product and who we were when we were building this, the first MVP at 2 weeks, we would be looking back at this and be so excited and think it was so, so cool. So I think even now, like it's a long game in mental health and medical device companies. So the other piece of advice is like it's like a roller coaster. For every good thing, there's like an equal and opposite bad thing just around the corner. But in the same way, for every bad thing, there's an equal and opposite good thing. And you'll look back and see something that you've built and be really, really excited about it and really, really proud, regardless of what the outcome is. So I wouldn't worry about the risk too much in terms of like it depends on I'm very privileged to be in a position, like young, no kids, like no mortgage. Like I get to do that.
Is that how you dealt with? It was like, obviously people told you were crazy at some point.
I had the best full like 360 moment. So yeah, I called my professors my neuroscience professors.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And they're like, Mom, doing bad idea.
Really?
Yeah, fully. Just like, I don't think it's going to work. It's not a good idea. You should do it.
Oh.
And I was like, this is kind of making me want to do it more. And I was like, all right, cool. Like whatever. And then a year, like maybe it's like 2 years, a year and a half to 2 years later, one of those same professors called me up to ask me for advice on this startup that he wanted to build. And he was like, it's totally working. God. Like, I shouldn't have told you it wasn't going to work. Like, you've done this awesome thing. So I had a very cool 360 moment of the same professor who told me not to do it.
That's
coming
wild.
and asking me for advice on his startup, which was like,
that is wild.
But really, like, if it's that easy for someone to convince you out of it,
then you probably should be doing it. Yeah. Thank you, Nathalie, for your time.
Thank you.
And I look forward to hearing more about whatever happens next at Neurode.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.